And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 13th episode of a new show called The Hoosier Sound. I am your host, Noah Freeman, and I am delighted to present you with this new podcast. We have one main goal to give you our perspective of IU sports from the point of view as a student or young adult. In addition, we will also give our view on hot takes from around the world of sports. We will be going live every Tuesday evening at 7:30 p.m. But if you miss us live, you can subscribe to our various networks so you can listen on your own time. We are located on iTunes or Apple Podcast, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and our live stream will be posted to YouTube after each recording. All you got to do is search for The Hoosier Sound wherever you listen to podcasts, then just hit subscribe. It's really simple, really easy, and it'll mean a lot to us if you guys just hit that subscribe button for us. Social media is also big for us, and we post updates for you guys in Facebook and Twitter. So make sure you guys give us a like and a follow, as well as subscribe on our YouTube account. All of the information is in the description below. Lastly, you can also check out our website, thehoosiersound.wordpress.com, to find out all of our information in one place. All right, Hoosier Nation, it's time for some sports talk. We are starting a new segment in each show that's going to be called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So for this show, I'm basically just going to use the whole episode to talk about my good, bad, and ugly takes from this past week. I'm writing solo tonight. Matt and Skibby are elsewhere, but we're going to see if we can get them on shortly in the coming weeks. But I'm going to start with the good. So to start out, I have two good things from the world of sports this last week. For starters, IU soccer. IU soccer, men's soccer, beat New Hampshire last Saturday 2-1 to advance to the Elite Eight in the men's NCAA soccer tournament. They improved to an impressive 17-0-5 record and will host the number 7 Michigan State team this Friday at 7:00 p.m. in Bloomington. This is the first time IU is hosting an Elite Eight game since 2004 when IU beat Tulsa 4-0. This is also the Hoosiers' 25th time that they have advanced to the Elite Eight, and their first time since 2012. Their 17 victories this season are the most since 2003, when IU finished with a 17-3-5 record and ended up winning their 6th national title at the time. The game itself against New Hampshire wasn't the best game for the Hoosiers, but they were still able to get it done. They took an early lead by scoring in the 11th minute, but it wasn't until basically late in the second half, right around the 65th minute, that the Hoosiers made it 2-0 on a penalty kick. Spencer Glass made a really beautiful play downfield and had a great run past defenders before he basically got tripped up, and they got penalized. So he made sure he capitalized on a penalty kick for a frustrated New Hampshire team for that call. New Hampshire, they props to them. They had a lot of really good pressure at the end of the game on a very good IU defense, and they were able to squeak a goal in the 77th minute. But basically, it was too little, too late for this quality of an IU caliber team, playing against an unranked and not as good New Hampshire team. But make sure you guys come out to the last home game of this incredible season this Friday at 7. If we keep winning, the Hoosiers will travel to Philadelphia to finish up the tournament in the Final Four and potentially the championship. So this Friday is the last game that the Hoosiers will host. Like I said before, they go on to Philadelphia. But there's another good part that I want to talk about the world of IU sports this past week, and that's the IU basketball team. Who knew that 2 weeks later, right after a surprising loss, well, the way that happened Indiana State, but at this time, this good segment is well deserved for Indiana basketball. This main point that I want to make is that this Hoosier team just keeps consistently improving every single game, and honestly, that's what really matters. If IU starts at the lowest of lows for this program, which they did, they have significantly changed since then. Obviously, starting with Indiana State. Just a terrible, terrible game that we've already talked about, but lowest of the low. So next game, they had Howard, which they got a W. Obviously that was expected, but hey, after so was ISU. So after that ISU win, a win is a win is a win, and it really helps with confidence, regardless of what happened. Archie got his first W, and it just helped the team get something going compared to what happened to ISU. But then they moved on to literally a potential Elite Eight team with Seton Hall, who they really played for next to for 20 minutes. 2 games earlier, they were getting their doors blown off by Indiana State. Now facing a really, really good team on the road, and played well, at least for the first half. Obviously the second half was different, but progress is progress. Moving on, then USF, again, not the best game, but they were to pull away with in the second half and have their biggest margin of victory of the season by winning by 17. It took a minute to get there, but hey, they still won by a large margin, and players like Rojo and Jawan were able to get back into their groove and basically started to play better. If you really take the first half of Seton Hall and the second half of USF, then that was actually a pretty good game. So then, as we go around talking about each game consistently improving, we move on to Arkansas State, which was roughly the same, but now we're starting to see consistency from Rob and Jawan, as well as a new face that has emerged in Al Durham. He is a freshman who hasn't committed a turnover in 130 minutes of play. That's incredible. He is someone that's being relied upon a lot now. Then, to this point, the cherry on top to this point, basically, IU played a very, very good game against Eastern Michigan. Before the season, we saw that this Eastern Michigan team was actually still pretty good. It wasn't a bad opponent at all. Even before we saw the loss against ISU, we still looked ahead to see that Eastern Michigan was not a bad game, and it was going to still be a test, especially with that Jim Boeheim zone defense, since the coach was one of Boeheim's predecessors, more or less. But IU goes into the game and plays its best all-around game by far. I was driving back to Bloomington, and I personally couldn't see the game or watch the game, but I was able to follow that little play-by-play thing on the ESPN app, and I was even excited just to keep following each play on there. Rob again looked pretty good, really good compared to at least the beginning of the season. Al again had 0 turnovers. Jawan had even a solid game, even though the box score didn't necessarily show that. Josh finally hit some shots, and he usually hits. The 3-point shot in general was falling for him, which was really good. Josh Roberts had quality minutes, and the best part of it was Colin Hartman returned. It was 6 minutes, sure, not that best, but really his presence just made everything feel different. The team felt more confident, more comfortable, and they just basically played a good all-around basketball game. The Eastern Michigan game really showed us what this team can accomplish and that they're really capable of good games this season, which is a huge positive. But moving on, yes, Duke this past weekend almost lost to Texas over the weekend, and they're just coming off of a close win against what was previously ranked number 7 Florida. IU is still probably going to lose, but at this point of the season, I honestly feel 100 times better going into this game than I did 2 weeks ago. Obviously, never ever count out Assembly Hall, as it's going to be crazy as usual. But we're at a good point now, honestly, after the last week in IU basketball, and it's good timing with this gauntlet of 5 games that are coming up. IU, even with a Duke loss, potentially a Duke loss, is still in the good category this week. We'll have to see if it continues into Big Ten play over the weekend, where we play Michigan away and then Iowa at home next Monday. But as long as they don't get kind of blown out by Duke, honestly, IU keeps consistently improving, and that's one of the comments that I really wanted to make. Speaking of which, real quick, make sure obviously everyone come out in full force tomorrow, 9:30, ESPN #1 Duke into Assembly Hall. IU has beat the last two #1 teams to come in here, and they've won the last 7 straight against top 5 opponents. So really never count out the magic against Assembly Hall. Obviously, it's not a great up, but even ESPN right now has Duke at only a 58.6% chance of winning, which is honestly a lot lower than I would have thought. There's no spread out yet, no line out yet for the over under, but obviously it's probably going to lean towards Duke. It's just a matter of how much. All right, we got the good. Now let's go to the bad. And I'm going to move away from IU sports for a minute, and bear with me, but this is a very interesting thing that happened this past weekend if you didn't see it. So this Alabama versus Minnesota basketball game on Saturday. So we're in the second half. There's about 14 minutes and 6 seconds remaining to go. And Minnesota's Mason pulls up for a 3. And him and Alabama's Colin Sexton started jawing off. They both got teed up. Tempers basically started to flare as Mason was walking back to the bench. He started jawing with more players and coaches. Minnesota coach Richard Pitino, not Rick Pitino, but it is his brother, Richard Pitino, gets a technical foul in all the scuffle. And what happened. It was kind of just a tense situation, basically. Fast forward to the next play. Literally the next play at the 13:39 mark, Alabama's Riley Norris makes a 3-point jumper, but as the shot was going up and then coming down into the hoop, under the basket, there were 2 players, Minnesota, Alabama, that were basically just getting into it with each other. They kind of started just pushing and shoving, as did the rest of the team, and they just kind of started to come in. So Alabama's bench came onto the floor, all of their bench, along with a lot of coaches and officials to break up the scuffle. There weren't any punches thrown. It was just kind of just pushing and shoving, mindless, just shouting at each other, basically. But when Alabama's bench came onto the floor, that's technically illegal, as you are not allowed to leave the bench in regardless of what the situation is. So the referees had no choice but to explain to the Alabama coach, Avery Johnson, that the entire Alabama bench, all 7 players, were ejected. So from here on out, basically Alabama would be playing with only 5 players. No one off the bench, no resting, basically got to go for the last under 14 minutes by themselves. And at that point, they were down 57-50 to Minnesota. Let's go to the 11:37 mark. Alabama's Dazon Ingram picks up his 5th foul. Under the NCAA rulebook, Rule 3, Article 2, if no one is eligible to play or able to play, teams can continue to play. So basically, if there were like this situation that they had no one left to come in, that they were able to play 5-on-4. A funny article, a rule in the rule book, Rule 3, Article 3, if there's only one player on a team, that the team shall forfeit unless the referee believes that both teams have the opportunity to win. Little interesting. But so Alabama basically from here on out, about 12 minutes, continues to play with 4 people, and that is legal. Skip ahead to 10:41. Alabama's John Petty pulls up for a 3, and sadly, he lands on his ankle weird. He was in a lot of pain. He had to leave to the locker room and get helped off. So that leaves 5-on-3 for the entire rest of the game. 5-on-3, Minnesota with the 5, Alabama with the 3. At this point, 67-54, Minnesota. The 3 remaining players for Alabama, Colin Sexton, Galen Smith, Riley Norris, actually played really well. Sexton went to work. He finished with 40 points, which is an Alabama freshman record. They brought what was at the highest, a 13, 14-point deficit. They brought that deficit to a 3-point game with 1:38 left. They outscored Minnesota 5-on-3, 30-22 in that final 10 minutes and 41 seconds. Alabama did end up losing, but wow. Like Minnesota had 5 people. You never, ever see that. A 5 versus 3 the whole time. Alabama was still able to come back and almost win the game if Sexton was able to score when it was 83-80, basically, to keep the momentum going. But I had this under the bad column for a few people. As a spectator who really doesn't care much about either team, this was really entertaining. But for a few parties, it was not as entertaining. The coach for Alabama, he's got to be livid that his players basically did that to the team and caused that to happen. Those 7 guys are probably going to be running this week a lot at like 5 a.m. or something, where the other 5 players are going to be sleeping in. Pitino, he's also got to be upset that they got outscored on 5v3 in the last 10 minutes and 41 seconds. That's bad for the Minnesota Gophers, the Golden Gophers. It's bad for Alabama's bench as well. But as a spectator, that was a really cool thing to see. But hats off to Sexton, Smith, and Norris for really sticking with it and not giving up by the very end of it. That moves us into our final category, the ugly. And as we all know, this past Saturday, Indiana football did not have a stellar game, to say the least. So my ugly column this week is Indiana football. We all know the Yakima game, obviously, and what was just a week earlier, where this Hoosier football team had its best game yet, honestly. Something just happened that changed this entire team. Honestly, I'm not really sure what that specific reason was, why their level of play just changed so drastically. Could have been on the road, could have been that it was a rivalry game, or that this game was basically a bowl or bust. There could have been 1,000 reasons. Whatever it was, something just didn't click for almost the entire game. Honestly, as hard as it is to hear, as an IU fan and as annoying as Purdue fans are, Purdue really did just take it to the Hoosiers, and they didn't let up for almost the entire game. Indiana couldn't find a way to ever bounce back after something negative happened. Whenever Purdue got going, IU was never really able to stop their momentum until it was basically just too late, down by those 3 scores. It seemed like from the very moment that Lego threw that Indiana opening drive interception, that everything just seemed different. Lego made some mistakes, but it wasn't just him, and I don't think he was as bad as people were really saying, which is a good segue into talking about the offense. So Lego, everyone on Twitter was basically screaming for Lego's head, screaming for a QB change. But first, I want to say, if you're going to make a statement, make sure it's an educated one. Ramsey has still been really banged up. I'm not actually sure if he was entirely ruled out or not, but they didn't want to risk it. They don't want to risk injuring potentially our starting QB for the next couple of years. They hadn't really used him since he got hurt in the Maryland game. That was a few games ago. And then when you look into it, Lego still threw for 373 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. So you take away that very first play, 373, 3 touchdowns, that's still pretty good. We talked about that first interception. It was 100% his fault, but he was still able to produce afterwards. Yeah, he was 32 for 60. That's not the best with completion percentage, but in his defense, wide receivers were dropping the ball way too many times. Other good way is segue into the receivers. They dropped the ball way too many times. There were so many easy passes that they had that they just couldn't bring in, and it didn't help move the chains because it seemed like we were always on third down, and we were. It felt like it was always. There was always a third down that we were trying to convert, and it never helped if some of these receivers would have just brought in some of those easy catches. But Moving on into the running game, man, Mike DeBoer, what are you doing? At first, we really couldn't run to save our lives the entire game. Let's take away Ricky Brookins' first or his only 2 carries. We rushed for 52 yards on 30 carries. That's 1.77 yards per carry. That's abysmal. Without Brookins, on average, we literally rushed for less than 2 yards per carry, which again leads me to my next part. If Brookins averaged 35.5 yards per carry with a 64-yard breakout run, why, oh, why did we not let him try and run the ball more? At that point when he came in, what else did we have to lose? I mean, the game was almost over. Literally, no one else was able to run the ball, and Morgan Ellison was on his way to the hospital. Sadly, why didn't you just try and run the ball more with him? I know it was later, and we needed to pick up more ground, basically in the passing game because we were down. But Guest ran a few times after those big plays by Brookins. So why didn't you even have Brookins attempt more? So, I mean, even after that 64-yard breakout run, he still ran for over 10 yards on his next carry. So why didn't you try it? You could have attempted for those 2 carries. Maybe he was someone that actually found a way to get through that Purdue front 7, which no one had been doing the entire game. But why was the running game not working? It was a lot of it was really the offensive line. This year it really hurt when Dan Feeney had to leave last year, and they never really fully recovered to what was actually a really good offensive line last year. I know they've struggled this year a lot, and I've never really given them as much flack as most other people have for their performance. There were times this season that they really did give good pass protection. How do you think Lego was able to throw for over 400 yards against Ohio State? You can't throw for that if you don't have any time, and the offensive line was able to give him time against an incredibly good defense. But this game, offensive line really couldn't just open up literally anything for the running backs. It was a collective effort on both the offensive line and the running backs, and there was no one else was really helping anyone out on either end, which is weird because their pass protection gave up only 3 sacks. Maybe they need to find a different style of run next year to compensate for the run game. Mike DeBoer, I don't know why. You guys couldn't have fixed the difference between the pass protection versus the running game, and it didn't happen the entire year. But I will give credit to their fight at the end of the game. It was just too little too late by the end of it. They kind of shot themselves in the foot when they really couldn't capitalize in the red zone at the very end of the game, or that 4th down when it mattered the most. They had multiple chances to still come back at the end, but giving up, not only scoring that touchdown or making anything else on an absolutely beautiful onside kick by Oaks. That really hurts. You can't put all your chips in one basket by asking a kicker to do an onside kick twice. A lot of it's kind of like a strategy game, kind of more than skill almost. Don't get me wrong. You definitely need to have that skill of being able to place a ball as an onside kick. But basically, once Griff showed his cards for the first time by using that opposite leg and going to the opposite side of the field, they were ready for it that time. But by the way, heck of a career for Griff Oaks. First, the kick was good, and it will always be good. Someone should honestly bring a sign in on Wednesday that says the kick was good. But even with a couple bad seasons, he's still IU's all-time field goal leader after this season. And he's with some monster kicks like the Michigan State upset kick in overtime, or the monster 58-yard kick his freshman year to break the school record for the longest kick. But I digress. Defense. I wish there was a stat for how many missed tackles that was more easily accessible to us, because, oh my goodness, this defense had more missed tackles than I've ever seen from them this all year. Markel Jones, who? I don't know. because this year he only rushed for 263 yards the entire season until it came to IU. The IU gave up 217 yards to a guy who averaged only 4.3 yards per carry this season and only rushed for 263 yards the entire season. Not to mention, he averaged only 5.5 carries per game. He only got the ball 5.5 times per game, and he only carried the ball 31 times. And he carried the ball this game 31 times. He averages 5.5 per game, and now he's going to 31. Most of this came off of missed tackles by even some of our best, like Tigray. There was an outside run to Purdue's left, and Tigray just missed a tackle. They got a first down again and kept moving the chains. And this is all why I had this in this game in the ugly category. IU football just didn't break through this season. They didn't have that breakout win. They couldn't close out games, even against someone like Maryland. We were 0-4 in games decided by a touchdown or one possession. We couldn't get one game out of 4 that was decided by one score. Breaking through is supposed to mean winning maybe 2 of those games, if not even more. I wouldn't categorize the football season this year as ugly, but I would probably put it in the bad column because the expectation for this team was that we were supposed to go to a bowl game. And like I just said, we had 4 games where we were just 1 score away. Just one more win, and we would have secured a bowl bid for Tom Allen's first IU football season as the head coach. Speaking of which, quickly, if you guys haven't followed our Twitter account, I highly recommend following it. Over the weekend, we were tweeting out all of the games that had to fall IU's way in order for them to sneak out a bowl bid with a 5-7 record. If you want to find out what needs to happen this weekend for IU to make a bowl, I challenge you guys to follow the Twitter account and check Sunday's tweet. You guys think all hope is lost? Maybe there's still some hope. Make sure you follow our Twitter page to check that out. But that about wraps it up for our 13th show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and please feel free to add suggestions in the comment section or contact us through our website. A reminder to follow us on Twitter at the Hoosier Sound, like our Facebook page, as well as subscribe to us on YouTube. If you enjoy the show, these are vital for receiving updates and statistics and stuff about our show. You can also subscribe on either Apple Podcasts, Google Play, iHeartRadio, or Stitcher, and leave us a review. All of the links are in the description below. Visit us at our website at thehoosiersound.wordpress.com to find all of our information regarding our podcast, and stay tuned for updates through social media. As always, send us your questions as the audience, so be sure to comment, chat, or send us a message on what questions you have, and we'll get them on our next episode. Lastly, if you enjoy our show, leave us a review. Tell a friend, share our links, and it really helps us out so that we can grow this podcast. But thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.